All right, narrative mindsetters, how's it going? Hope everybody's doing okay. It's a little early, so take your time getting up. Me myself, uh, I'm up, and this is my day. I got to go back to work here in a little while, about 7:33 right now, and I got to go back to work around 10. Well, we got to be there about we clocking in about 10:25. Um, I'm still a little bit under the weather, but I mean, I'm nothing that's gonna keep me from going to work. Uh, I'm glad to have a job. You know, because I sat around this house, before, and it was like it was worse than watching paint dry. I got real fidgety, and I was about to lose my mind. So it kind of makes me wonder. Well, it's kind of making me wonder, am I going to be able to handle retirement? Because when you retire, you don't really do anything. So, I mean, we'll see. But something I was kind of thinking about, you know, it, I remember I'm 53 years old, right? And I remember back in the 80s when I was in junior high school, whatever. And I remember back when the natural kind of short hair look for women was in, right? And all due respect to women, because women have, they've been through so much, and they have a rougher life that's easy to criticize, but very hard to live. So I want to get that out the way. Back then, when we wore short hair, there wasn't any, really a whole lot of eyelashes and hair extensions and yada yada yada, that kind of stuff. And it was really cool because, excuse me, you got to see the actual woman, you know. And you know, I'm not sure when the shift changed, what generation it happened in, or whatever. But now, as we all know, you meet a totally different person, right? You meet the person after the transformation, and then I'm assuming in most cases when you wake up the next morning, if you get a chance, if you're chosen as a man, you wake up the next morning to a totally different person. You wake up to the real them. And that's really strange. And they in today's world, I mean, you kind of, you get cussed out for mentioning that particular fact. When in the end, all you're saying is, I just want to meet the real you. I don't think that's too much to ask. It's like a man, y- you know, wearing a bunch of stuff, a costume basically, and then you choose him, whatever. Wake up the next morning and that's totally different person. And I think that's, I'm not sure what the disconnect is, but I think that a lot of women in this particular case, because you can't say men, because men, we don't, you know, only thing we can hide behind is you know, uh, you know, nappy head or some dirty clothes. That's about it. You know, you throw on some good clothes and go get a line up, turn into a different person. That's all we got. But women sometimes have a totally different, uh, have a totally different the option level or whatever, you know, and, you know, some of it, in my opinion, and this is just my opinion, is ridiculous. You know, you do what you want to do because that's your choice. That's your choice. So nobody can say anything about that, you know. But I miss the '90s so bad, you know. I remember back in the '90s, back when the you know, back when they made songs back then, the songs resonated so well because the songs they represented what you were going through. You know, when you were going through heartache and whatever, that's what those songs back then, that's what they represented. You know, and that was the important part. That was really the important part. And and it was definitely you know, it was amazing. I remember making a tape for a female. Because, you know, we were going through it and I found a bunch of songs that could relate to our relationship or whatever. And you know, it was, you could do that back then because the music related to what you were going through in most relationships, in most situations. So it was a direct relation. So you know, the song they were singing about was what you were going through. You know, and that was a wonderful part about the '90s. You know, and it was. I mean, don't get me wrong. You know, cheating and probably what do you call it? Uh, it was more than likely a start of the whole what's the word for it? Uh I can't think of the word, like an add-on generation. Nails and stuff like that. But it was more so the natural look. You know, a nice short haircut or whatever, you know, natural body, all that kind of stuff. And then all of a sudden, it just kind of blew up, you know. Women are more started to get more thicker, and it was like, you know, this is crazy. This is, you know, you know, you felt kind of strange because these were like, you know, these were basically younger women. So it's like, you know, you turn your head, you're like, you know, I'd watch this girl grow up. You know, what did I miss? You know, and then it just progressed uh, further and further down the line to where now, you know, though that same girl has kids and they have kids, and you know, it's a whole generation of that. But you know, I really miss the old days when it was just, you know, you were as you were. You know, granted, you may not agree with who you actually were, but at that time, it was like, who really cared? You know, because it was like you had to, you know, you had to be yourself. You know, and that was, you know, really something you couldn't hide behind because I think at that point in time, like wigs and extra stuff like that was kind of frowned upon because it wasn't even in yet. Even I remember big wheels. The whole big wheel era. Back then, I remember seeing a couple cars with big wheels and low profile tires, and at that point in time, they just looked strange only because that particular era, it hadn't been that particular thing hadn't came in yet. It wasn't accepted fully yet. So it really wasn't something that you could really wrap your head around because it just wasn't in yet. And at that point in time, you'd have to be really bold to go ahead and do it because almost nobody was really doing it. So it was like a completely out of trend kind of thing. So it was, you fast forward to the '90s now, it's I don't know, it's like totally different, and it really, it's really different, and now it's like I really hate to say this, but now it's like another stream of income for certain people that they're making billions off of off of the one change into extensions and this and that and the butt injections and all that kind of stuff. That's a $1 billion industry. And certain people have even they've had a support team around them that has really tried to tell them, hey, you really shouldn't do this. It's up to you. You're an adult, but you really shouldn't do this. I wouldn't recommend that you do this. They still go and do it anyways. And some of them, it has cost them their lives. I'm not going to say any names, but some of them is cost them their lives on that decision to to be what they think is the model person, and one thing I can say about it, and I respect these people, is if you take a gay male, right, and it's pretty much gay male is pretty much equivalent to a gay female because they're both trying to do the same thing. Only on one hand, the gay male, he's really trying to transform himself into into what he thinks mostly appeals to what he will attract. The gay the no, not the gay female, the regular female, I'm sorry. But the regular female, she already has what will attract what what she wants when she gets out of bed in most cases. But she still wants to enhance. That was the word I was looking for earlier. Enhance that because she's not happy with what she sees. And it's basically two of the somewhat same situations, but one is kind of taking perfect almost and kind of ruining it by trying to enhance it. The other is trying to enhance. It's kind of a flip side. It's a man trying to, trying to transform into a woman somewhat, or certain characteristics of a woman to so he seems more appealing to, the type of people that he wants to attract or the person he's with or whatever. It's kind of somewhat the same situation, somewhat, but it's a little bit different because it's just neither. Well, one person is neither are happy because both of them are trying to change their appearance from what is already good enough. Only one, I want to enhance to a little bit better. The other, I want to enhance to, to a certain, in a way. I want to enhance to a different, almost a different sexual orientation, almost. Nothing against gays or LGBT or whatever, but it's just a little bit different, and it's almost the same situation, but it's just a different, a different process. But all in all, well, like I said, I hate that I really hate that the '90s were. I really hate that that '90s era is gone. I really do. But that's it for this episode. That's all I wanted to get off my chest. As always, have a good one.